So welcome this morning. We're really grateful to have you here as wonderful mentors and to share your wisdom with our colleagues today. So I thought we could just do kind of quick lightning introductions first before we go ahead and dive into that first question. So let's just go alphabetical order by last name because that's probably easiest for now. So John.
Well, that must be me first. That's great. Hi, everybody. I'm John Kessler, professor in electrical and computer engineering, and thanks, Rebecca, for doing this. Mentoring is something that I take very seriously and near and dear to my heart. So it's a great thing. I run a large research team, and I also teach undergraduate and graduate courses in ECE. However, my pride and joy are the courses that I teach for undergraduates of all majors. And I do two of those actually. In the fall, I teach at the College of Engineering, Microelectronics and Nanotechnology for the T&M program and for the honors program and the rest of campus. And in the spring, which I'm doing now, I actually teach as a liberal arts professor and I do a course on science and religion, which is, I like to argue, the most diverse classroom on campus and the hardest get for a student. I had 105 applicants for my 20 slots this spring, which was awesome. And they have to actually apply with an application to be considered for a permit there. So I love working with students and I love talking about mentoring. It's something we all take very seriously, I know. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mary, you're next.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Mary Peake. I'm a principal academic professional in the School of Chemistry and Biochemistry. I'm a Georgia Tech graduate. I got my PhD here, and so I have a long history of being in the school and a strong love of students. My primary responsibility is to teach undergraduates. I run the biochemistry laboratory here. And I'm a teacher at heart. I've, loved teaching for a long time, most of my life, from what I can tell. But I did get a chance to do some research at a couple of different pharmaceutical companies before joining Georgia Tech. And so I really love to use those experiences to shade my mentoring of students because many of them don't really know what careers they're interested in pursuing. They sort of either pursue graduate school or medical school. Those are sort of our top two things that appeal to students, but many of them just don't know what they want. And so I feel very blessed to be able to give them some more insights and help them brainstorm their future careers as one way to engage them in mentoring.
Bill?
Well, thank you. Like John, I'm passionate about mentoring. I'm Bill Todd, professor of the practice in the Shepler College of Business. Like Mary, I am an alum. And like Ellen, I'm always at the end of the alphabet, but never at the tail end like you. I came back to Georgia Tech after a 40-year career in healthcare and technology management. I was a CEO in 3 different companies that I started. And then I was in the Emory system as a hospital administrator for the first 20 years. So I came back to sort of a pre-retirement gig. It was supposed to be 2 or 3 years. It's been 10 and a half. So I'm having fun. And part of the fun is the engagement with students and mentoring. When I was chairman of the board of the Alumni Association 12 years ago, I created the Mentor Jackets program where alumni mentor students, and there's something like 2,000 pairs. So it's a passion of mine, and I'm honored to be here with these distinguished colleagues.
Hi, everybody. As Bill kindly mentioned, I'm very used to being at the very end of the alphabet. I actually, Ziger is my married name. I was a W already, and I figured as I just head to the end. So, like everyone else, I'm delighted to be here, and I share the passion for mentoring and the joy in working with students. I've been faculty at Georgia Tech for, shockingly, almost 30 years. I came in 1993. I've seen a lot of changes, and I feel like I've seen a lot of changes in the way that we prioritize students and very much for the better compared to the way things were, in my view, in the 1990s. I run a medium-sized research group, I guess you'd say, but I also am involved with the Bits of Good student organization and an associated VIP, so I have some interaction with students in that kind of setting. I'm also teaching a 275-person class, which is the largest by more than double than I've ever taught before, a sophomore level class. And I have been serving as an ombudsperson for graduate students in the School of Computer Science. So I have had a little bit different window on the student experience coming through that. And I would say one of my great joys is to see my students mentoring each other, or see them start to take on some of that role. And if you have mixed groups, like most of us do, where there are more senior students and more junior students, that's especially rewarding and valuable, I think, to see coming about.
Thank you all for those introductions. So let's just dive right into the questions. So I have a few questions, and then we'll open the floor up for participant and audience questions as well. So what is your mentoring philosophy, and why is mentoring important to your teaching approach? Anybody want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm the exception in this distinguished group. Unlike my colleagues, I am not an academic. I'm a practitioner. So as a professor of the practice, I think it's baked into what I'm here to do, is to provide mentorship in the transition as kind of a bridge from theory to practice. So the main course I teach is one that I created when I came 10.5 years ago, healthcare management, where we try to cover this entire $3.3 trillion industry in 15 weeks. 60% of my students are Shepler students, and then 40% are everything else, engineering and science. And it's very applied. We cover the entire span from prevention to early detection and diagnosis to treatment to palliation. So we kind of follow the continuum of care for a person in trying to examine the industry. So everything that we do, the guest speakers, the cases, we use the case method, as you know, in business schools very rigorously, is a story, an example of leadership in action or a failure of leadership in this particular industry. And so there are many, many opportunities to expose students to careers that they wouldn't even know. So healthcare is very opaque. We all know what doctors and nurses do. What about all the rest? Well, the number of all the rest is more than the number of physicians and nurses and direct caregivers. So students find careers that are meaningful and rewarding throughout the course, and that gives me great pleasure to expose them to that with these guest speakers and the cases and the lectures. So it's just baked into it. So it's just part of what we do as professors of the practice. By the way, there's I think 43 of us institute-wide now. There's at least one in each of the 6 colleges. They range from 4-star generals and admirals to astronauts to CEOs to pretty famous people, actually. And it's an interesting niche that we are involved in. And the reason why my 3-year commitment to be a professor of the practice has turned out to be 10 plus.
I'm happy to go next if that's okay. So Rebecca, if it's all right with you, I was asked a few years ago to write my philosophy of teaching and mentoring for a global student community as an article, actually. And I went back to that, actually, because as a part of that process, I framed what I call my credos for how to succeed for me in that field. And I was going to just share that because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about, if that's all right. So you hopefully can see that. Can folks see that? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. So this is actually, I wrote this really as it relates to graduate students, but I think as I went back through it this morning, thinking about that from my undergraduates, right? So I call these my credo. So what I believe in terms of the essentials for effective mentoring. And I think mentoring, I think we would all agree, is an art form. At least that's the way I view it. So there's no one size fits all. But things that work for me are kind of these, right? I'll go them very quickly. So the granite for me is getting an informal collaborative vibe in both classroom and in research teams, such that your students feel you're approachable, right? And so show your students that you care about their well-being. And in my experience, if students can determine that you care about them, they're going to want to share and ask and get advice from you. And that's seems like some days half of my job is actually just talking to students and through life issues, right? So let your students know you and the things you value. No cloning, so I celebrate diversity of thought and culture and religion and any diversity metric. Regular contact time is essential, but I don't overdo it. Right? It's important for them to discover among their peers the things they need to do. I give candid appraisals, but always constructive. I lead by example and work as harder than my students. And Ellen said this earlier, and I think it's absolutely key, is actively encouraging my students to be mentors to each other. And I think that's a beautiful thing to watch, and it really serves our students well at the end of the day as they move into the. I empower my students to use me really only as a sounding board for their own ideas. I much prefer that they have the ideas and to give them feedback than to me to have the ideas. I try to always be patient and upbeat and optimistic and joyful, even in a pandemic. Not always successfully, but I try hard. And then I think one for me, particularly at the graduate level, which is really essential in my experience and fairly rare, and that is providing a very safe and comfortable environment for my students to fail. And I think failure is an important learning vehicle for all of us. And sometimes our contracts and goals are so driven that we don't give opportunities for students to make mistakes without penalty. And I try very hard to do that. I celebrate their accomplishments of us as a team and give credit where credit's due, of course. And then should be a no-brainer to all of us to cultivate ethics and always remember the golden rule when it comes to interacting with young people. So again, I kind of wrote that for my graduate experience, but I think that's also true in the classroom experience in my career at least. And I've been at Tech now 20 years and a professor for 30 years too. So and I actually graduated from Georgia Tech as an undergraduate, so I know this place pretty well. Students, in my experience, are hungering for elder wisdom. And they will only, in my experience, go that direction when you get to know them and show that you're approachable and open and willing to give advice. And I think that's my life experience of teaching and why I love it so much is the opportunity to give feedback to students when they need feedback and they're thirsting for it. I really, really feel that actually. So I'll stop there, but that's kind of what I'm about as a teacher and a mentor. I view those things, by the way, as hand in hand. Half of my classroom experience is a mentoring experience, and half of my research experience is a mentoring experience as well. And that's kind of, I view teaching as a very broad umbrella of all the things we professors do, right? And have the privilege to do, actually. It's a beautiful thing. So thank you.
Thank you, John.
I'll go next if you want. So I sort of framed my philosophy of mentoring around how I've been mentored. And I've been very blessed to have some phenomenal mentors over the course of my career. We already mentioned Bill Barron in the chat earlier. Dr. Shepler and I have had the privilege of being around him. But I also worked for Bud Sutter. I was his last graduate student, for those of you who are familiar with him. And I mean, you're talking about just a class act right there. And so one of the things that is sort of similar between these two gentlemen is their encouragement. And I really love, focusing on the encouragement. As a Georgia Tech student and even as a faculty member here, I have sort of recognize that, Georgia Tech expects excellence out of everyone. And rarely do we give people a high five when you do a great job, unless you do something to win an award or, get some kind of open praise. But if you do something wrong, you know about it immediately. You get that feedback immediately. And that's not really the best way to motivate people to be their best. So I try to take a different approach where I can in my classroom and really try to help students see when they're doing things that they don't even realize are outstanding, that they're showing the behaviors and they're giving me this sort of feeling that they're going to really succeed. They don't know it because no one tells them. So they never get that positive feedback on an ongoing basis. And I've just really been blessed by affirming students in this way along the way, because that's what was done for me. And it really did help encourage me to persevere through trials, which is such an important skill that they need to learn how to do in life, no matter what career they choose to pursue. So encouragement is sort of my anchor, philosophical point for mentoring. And I just feel like the more we can encourage people to be the very best they can be, the more they're going to be at peace with however they perform, good or bad. You have to learn. Sometimes you will fail, but they'll be able to overcome it much easier when they recognize that they're not all bad, and that feedback and that voice in their head is not all negative. So that's sort of my take on the whole thing. Thanks.
So I guess I'm thinking about my mentoring philosophy in two different categories. I think there's one kind of mentoring setup, which in some ways is the easier one, right? This is our own research students that we work with in relatively smaller groups. We have a fair amount of one-on-one time with them. And we really have a chance to establish a relationship. And for me, that's one of the keys of mentoring is the relationship. And I for students in that category, I really, I like to, if they are open to it, kind of know them as whole people. Because I think especially for graduate students, it's true of undergrads as well, but graduate students are very much trying to figure out what their life is going to be, and where does research fit in that, and is that the right path, or is academia the right path versus industry? So they have a lot of decisions, at least on the horizon, that interact with the rest of their life. And so I both, will share things about my own life as a way of connecting and indicating, signaling that I'm, that I don't tend to compartmentalize myself as kind of professor and myself as human. I've done things like during the pandemic, I started doing quite a lot of hiking with my research group. It was a great way to spend time together in a safe way. And we also had it connected to a research project we were doing on measuring cell phone connectivity on hiking trails. I think that in the classroom is somewhat more challenging because your time is, you have a number of content objectives, right, in the classroom, and you may be in front of a large number of students. And so there, I think this sort of signaling openness, signaling, being available for conversation, and that conversation might be broader than how do I solve, problem number 2 on the homework, is really probably the cornerstone of my philosophy. I also think there are times when students ask questions, even, in a very technical class, where there's a mentoring opportunity in the answer, right? So, I'll have to think about what makes a good example of this, but some of it is around things like, how should I prepare for the test? All right. Now, I have some very specific kinds of things to say, but there's also a sort of broader question underlying a question like that, which has things to do with valuing learning, how you put doing well on the test in perspective with what else is happening in the class. And so I think kind of without going overboard and, super preachy all the time, there's a chance in some of those questions to kind of take a little step back and also answer it with a sort of mentor hat on.
For sharing your philosophies. I see a couple of questions in the chat. We will come back to those for our discussion time. So I do see them and we will get back to them. So question number 2, and many of you have already kind of touched on this a little bit. What makes a successful mentoring relationship?
Well, I think the first thing is credibility. My colleagues on the panel are clearly experts in their field, and hopefully with 40 years of experience in healthcare management, I have some credibility about the content of that. And so students feel comfortable, I think, in coming to me asking about these opportunities and about the field and about what it's like and whether they're a good fit and that sort of thing. I have to say that I'm so glad that Mary brought up Bud Sudduth. Bud Sudduth was the late Bud Sudduth was a great mentor to me, and I'll give an example where he was teaching me how to assess values and ethics in a person, something near and dear to John's heart. I was the CEO of the Georgia Research Alliance. I created that in 1990. Bud came to see me early in that time, maybe 91 or so, and I was really under a lot of pressure to produce, and I had a contract possibility with an organization, and the leader of that organization was problematic to me. I just didn't feel comfortable with him. I didn't feel that he was ethical. And so Bud came in to see me, and he saw my furrowed brow, and he said, what are you troubled about? And I told him about this. I needed to produce. I needed to get some money going and moving to the 6 universities, and this would have done it. But I didn't feel comfortable. And he said, that is so easy. And I said, really? He said, yeah. Only do business with nice people. What? That is the most pedantic stereotype I've ever heard. What are you talking about? And he said, if you don't feel comfortable about a person's values and ethics, don't walk away, run. I did. My board was not too happy with me for walking away from a big lucrative contract. And 6 months later, the guy was indicted and went to prison for fraud. So some of mentoring, I think, is teaching those soft skills about evaluating people. I mentioned earlier that one of my interests is evaluating organizations and understanding their culture. And culture defeats strategy every time. And we can have a great strategy, but if you don't have the right culture, it won't work. So I'm a student of organizational culture, and kind of going along with that, trying to understand people and size them up. And if there's a red line of ethical difficulty, that's what cannot be crossed. And we bring up ethics in almost every case that I teach. I'm a believer that you can't segregate ethics over into a particular course or one day of a class of a curriculum. It needs to be embedded in everything we do. And I think that's sort of a mentoring philosophy, is helping students feel comfortable with their own intuition and evaluation of other people, just as they're evaluating other organizations. So they get that. And earlier was mentioned the caring aspect. When I assess the CEO's results and the free text, just delight in the fact that so many people mention it's clear that he cares. I like that. I want that. In fact, I actually do a little scattergram of all the words that come out in CEO's evaluations 2 weeks after the end of the semester. And I like it when there's a big bubble that says caring. So I think that's part of what a good mentoring relationship is built upon, is they know you care, therefore they can be open, they can be exploratory, they can they can be willing and open to failure, as we've talked about many times in this workshop.
Yeah. I actually completely, just to jump on that, completely agree with what you said, Bill, and that is, if students see your sincerity, that you care for their well-being, not just in mastering academic material, but actually in appreciating the problems they face and the directions of life questions that they have, they're going to enter into that relationship with mentoring, I think, voluntarily. And Ellen, I like what you said earlier about the whole person. There are, in my teaching experience, and in my research experience as well, there are no boundaries between my life and who I am as a professor and as a teacher, right? And I think students absolutely value that. Does that take some risk and vulnerability on the teacher's part? It does, actually, to be real to your students. But man, students can sniff that a mile away. If you're hiding part of your life from them, yeah, they get that instantly, and it puts a barrier there, in my experience, that few students are going to want to cross. Just one tidbit on my teaching style, and it's just a teaching style, and that is, for 30 years now, I have ended every single class I've taught, no matter the context, graduate, undergraduate, whatever, with a quotation that allows me a segue to say a few words about my life experience and to plant a thought and an idea for them. And I actually have gotten in that habit. I've always gotten great receptivity to it, and I think it gives you a way to seamlessly talk about life, and it's life issues. I always talk about to my students, like, we all get Georgia Tech and its rigors, right? Let's talk about life, right? I mean, life is a lot different than what you're going to see in the classroom, and they often that's what I think they often thirst for, is a willing and listening ear, empathetic ear to get that, actually, and to hear them. I also, I think, was a good point Ellen made about the size and dynamics of classrooms. I have to very sheepishly say that I rarely teach a class over 35 students. So within a couple of weeks, I know their names and begin to know things about them. So that is a challenge, I think, in a large classroom venue that I don't actually have a lot of experience in. But I love the dynamics, and I think, just as you said, Ellen, there are teachable moments in about everything we say. And that often, if students perceive that you're willing and open, those teachable moments can lead to secondary conversations, even in large classroom experiences, I think.
I underscore everything that people have shared. I was thinking the key is vulnerability, both
Mm.
on the side of the mentor and the mentee. You know, you have to be willing to say things, to share your failures, with
Yeah.
the students, so that they see that you're a real person and you're still standing. It's not over just because you may mess up or, not do your best at one point. It doesn't mean that your career is killed as a result of that. So just helping them to see that they need to just keep striving and keep moving forward, and that usually things will work out for the best. May not be what they want or what they expected or even what they planned, but somehow, some way, usually they end up in a good place.
I've a little bit forgotten the question, and I thought maybe I would also, since I'm number 4, jump a little bit to something slightly different, because I think there's a fantastic set of responses already. And John, I'd like to hear one of your quotations, just to think about what you do, and that sounds fascinating. I'm going to jump on this question from Zach about contact and with students, and how much to mandate and how much to let students come and go, because I think it gets at an issue of kind of the need to be flexible as a mentor. Students, not every student is the same, and they will respond differently. Some really thrive, especially at certain points in their career, on lots of contact, and others, kind of want to be alone, left alone for part of the time. I would say one thing that I found really a silver lining from the pandemic, which I certainly would be happy to have not had at all, is how much it changed for me the quick meetings. You know, prior to the pandemic, with all of my graduate students or undergrad research students, we had once a week meeting on the calendar. Sometimes we would cancel depending on, if circumstances were conflicts in scheduling, or occasionally if there wasn't much progress to report. But with the pandemic, it was so easy to jump on, a Zoom call or Blue Jeans call for just a few minutes. We'd be on Slack and say, "Oh, I have this graph. I don't understand it. Do you have a few minutes?" Sure. Jump on, take a look at the graph. 10 minutes later, we're both back to whatever it was we were doing. And I really think that for me, that addition, kind of thinking about the contact being able to come in multiple forms, some of it scheduled and some of it ad hoc, some of it with a half hour or hour long time block, some of it in this very quick style, and sometimes the quick ones would turn into something longer. I really found that to be incredibly valuable addition to the kind of interaction I was having with students. And I do think, to your question, Zach, with students for whom you really are working closely, I think it helps to mandate a minimum amount of contact, because otherwise they can really get off track, and they may be stuck on something and not realize that you could help them get unstuck very quickly. And I also think, just for the mental health aspect, they can go off and really need the contact to help bring them back to a more productive and a more kind of healthy space.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just my own experience with my graduate team is I meet one-on-one with students 1 week, and then the next week we meet as a full team, right? So it's sort of an every other week experience, with the caveat, and I like what you said, Alan, because it was my experience as well with the single useful thing of the pandemic was probably that aspect, and that is, I make myself available to my graduate students and my undergraduate students whenever they need me, right? So I'm on call, so to speak, is the way I see it. Now that, of course, could get out of hand with a huge class, but I think particularly with your graduate students that you got a relationship of 5 or 6 years with, having them feel empowered to contact me when they need me, whatever that is, actually, is kind of the open rule in my own team. Actually, it works pretty well.
We have a question in the chat that I'm going to go ahead and read. Can you all speak to the necessity of Black students, people in general, and really the entire BIPOC community having not just mentors, but champions and advocates on their sides? How have you been able to champion advocate for those you mentor, and who has been that person for you?
I can speak to that, at least for my undergraduates and my courses. Because I teach laboratory courses, I'm in a unique position where I can watch them work, And Ellen, like you said, the pandemic has actually opened up a new opportunity for me to engage with students, because there was this fear in 2020 that if we got sick, everything was shut down. So we were encouraged not to go in the classroom, which is what I would normally do in the laboratory. Because they've got 6-hour labs, right? So I don't need to be around people coughing and hacking and catching their germs for 6 hours. So I installed computers and web cameras, if for all practical purposes, so that I could be at home, chime in and see the class and even engage with the students via Blue Jeans just from a webcam. In the lab, so I could see the whole lab and get a good view of what's going on in the lab. So, but now that we're back more in person, what I've started to do is try to sort of do what I call my rounds, almost like doctors do rounds, and visit their patients just quickly. And I go in and check on on them. And as I notice some key things, I try to advocate for students by, asking them things like, have you considered doing undergraduate research? And if they say, no, I'm like, you've got a lot of talent here. You're wasting your time. You need to be in somebody's group. Let's make that happen. And I'll try to give them resources for facilitating that. But if they need my help, I will even give a recommendation via an email, like an email introduction to someone that I think might be a good fit for them. And that's one way that I've found to be very effective, at least for undergraduates, with helping to sort of advocate for them and promote them. Maybe advocacy is not the right word, but it's more promotion, promoting them in terms of their careers. And certainly I'm always willing to advocate where I can, as students bring issues up to me that I can have some kind of impact on.
I do think it can be potentially more challenging for people from underrepresented groups to find effective mentors. And in general, I think sharing with students that a mentoring, you really want a set of mentors. You want to have multiple people that you can draw on, and those people may serve your needs, for mentoring in different ways. You don't have to get everything from a single person. And especially if you're underrepresented, then, you may want to stitch together, perhaps domain expert mentors who might not look like you, but maybe mentors for other kinds of issues that may look like you but are coming from a different discipline. When I was a graduate student, I had a really generous fellowship that was for female graduate students, and I think I was the only computer science student who had that fellowship, and there were not a whole lot of us, a lot of women in computer science, but that network that got formed from these female grad students across a number of different disciplines, neuroscience, social work, law, that was a very strong peer mentoring network where we had things in common because we were female grad students, and that transcended our different disciplines. And so kind of that strategy of a network of mentors and reaching outside your discipline, especially if the options are limited for someone who looks like you within your discipline.
I'll share this story. At the time, I didn't think of it as mentorship, but as I reflect back on it, I think that's exactly what it was. 2017, when the Muslim ban happened, I had two female students in my healthcare management class who were Muslims and covered. And before class started, a class of 50, I invited each one of them up to the well to speak to me. So it was a semi-private exchange. People could hear it. It was not that they were coming to my office. It was before class. It was the day after it happened. And I said to each of them, I want you to know three things. One, you're welcome in this classroom. Two, you're welcome in Georgia Tech. And three, if you have any problem with that, if anybody questions that, come see me and I'll advocate on your behalf. The first woman just had her eyes as big as saucers and she just said thank you and left. The second woman started a dialogue. She said, thank you, that's very helpful. The good news is we've heard that same thing from students, from peers, but we've never heard it from faculty, and it's really helpful. Thank you. Turns out that woman was the president of the Muslim Student Association, and that word spread very quickly, and it was positive. It was like John talks about it. It was an expression of ethics and values, and the word got out pretty quickly. Both those students are now in medical school, one's in residency, and it was turning something terrible into something that turned out to be positive.
That's a beautiful story, Bill. So I think these are all great things to hear. I think faculty seeking out the opportunities to mentor underrepresented groups is a part of my life, actually. So I'm a mentor to high school students at the Cristo Rey School downtown. And a lot of those students have actually come into Georgia Tech, and I've continued those mentoring relationships. A lot of them are Clark scholars that get support for that, and so I connect myself with that group to advocate for them and provide a sounding board. They're often seeking community, right, and advice, and so that's something that I believe strongly in, and I think ideally you have that in your own research teams as well, and I do myself. But I think the new students at Georgia Tech that come into an environment that is very foreign to them in terms of their life experience require special care, and I think that's something we can all, well, Georgia Tech can do better at, but I think we can all play a role in, actually, if we seek those opportunities out.
Thank you for sharing. We have another question in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read that. Regarding classroom teaching, how can you encourage students to prioritize their own learning and growth over comparing themselves to others when ultimately this is often what grades represent? There's more, but we'll leave it at that since we're nearly out of time. So as a mentor in the classroom, how do you help students with this kind of need to compare themselves?
Yeah. I think in my classroom experience, that is one of the most common things I hear is this comparison aspect. And I think we all know this, right? But you come into a Georgia Tech and you're valedictorian of your class and you think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? And now you're surrounded by people that are twice as smart as you are, right? And twice as accomplished. And so you hear the term imposter syndrome. I hear that all the time, actually, even from graduate students. This notion of comparison, I guess it comes with the territory to some extent, but I think it's and I don't have a solution to that problem, but it's real and alive for sure at both undergraduate and graduate levels. And I think kind of what Mary was saying early on is like encouragement that you are who you are, and to not measure yourself by other people. It's your own self-actualization, to me, that is the important thing. And we all are different, and we all have different skill sets, right? But anyway, just a thought there.
Literally just, can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Compare herself in my class earlier this week, and because several of her peers got done with their experiment like an hour before she was at the end, and there was plenty of time left in the lab period, but it just seeing all those bodies leave, made her say, how is it that they're done? This is really hard for me. And I was like, don't worry about them. Some of them came in the room with more exposure to these concepts, and so of course it's not hard for them. This is new to you, so give yourself a break. And let's just focus on what's at hand. You're doing fine. So, this is what I mean by people need that encouragement. They need to hear that voice of, you're okay being you, and I think they just don't hear it enough. So as instructors, we're in a great position to sort of affirm people more and more. And I really do feel like this does piggyback into their mental health, because so many of them are struggling with their perceptions of themselves, and they're making a lot of assumptions about what others think of them, and that's what's fueling the comparison in the first place. So, I feel like the more you can just sort of dispel these myths, focus on, what you're trying to do, your purpose here, and getting people to just center themselves there is a really good thing. And we can just do it by just establishing that is the ground rules for interaction in the course, to just sort of emphasize it more to students. Hopefully that can help them, but it's a work in progress. It just takes time.
There's a lot of discussion in the chat going back to the idea of identity, finding mentors of the same identity representation. I'm going to be brave and ask Tammy if she wants to come on stage and just share a thought for our mentors and ask her question.
Hey, you mean going back to my original question?
Or as the
Or
conversation is shaping up in the chat, if you just want to
yeah,
follow up a little.
yeah. And like I said, majority of my professional mentors have been white, be they male, be they female. My PhD advisor, Dr. Cochran, he was one of the best. I'm like Mary. I'm like he set the example for how to treat your students and all of that, and how to prioritize your family as well as your work. But and I guess my question was more speaking to the significance of having someone in your corner, because this is how I kind of model my mentoring, making sure that this is someone I genuinely care about. This is someone that I genuinely want to see succeed, so that if I'm having a conversation with the Dr. Mary Peake and we're having lunch together and talking about something professional, and she brings up something, oh, so and so would be good for that. I think immediately about someone that I can speak to their strengths that I'm mentoring to Mary and say, well, I know somebody who can do that. In the same way that you would do for your children or do for your best friend or do for whatever the case may be, someone who's going to think about you and bring your name up behind those closed doors, who are at that table that you might not ever get to. So that was really my focus of that question.
You know, Tammy, I've been in situations where I had people advocating for me, and I found out later, many years later, that these people were advocating for me, and I never knew that they even noticed me. And it was a huge shock. So my encouragement to all of my students is be your best, do your best, and let the excellence of your work and your work ethic and everything that you bring to the table shine. People will see it, and you just would be shocked at who would advocate for you behind those closed doors, because oftentimes it's not who I would imagine. It won't always be the women in the group because I'm a woman. It won't always be the black people because I'm black. It will be other people sometimes, believe it or not, and they could be the most surprising people that you would imagine. You'd never know who's watching you. So that's why I just encourage all of my students, just do your best. And the more you start to pick up on, especially in my role as a lab coordinator, I really watched their performance a lot. And so it really helps. And I think some of the other colleagues here who are mentoring graduate students, for example, you get to really see the nitty gritty of how they're forming. You're almost like their academic parents in a way. And so you're watching them grow up, you're watching them mature, and so you have a perspective that's unique compared to other people. And for those who are in those key positions, it's getting that data that's going to help you be able to bring up people's names. But I think that I would hope that students who are from the minority groups in our campus would not feel that because they're minorities that they get forgotten. That I would not want that to happen. That there would be a perception that people are forgotten because they're minorities in this place. Is that what you're worried about? Okay,
Oh
okay.
no, I was just looking at a different angle when we talk about the mentoring, like these different levels of mentoring, I guess. And as Rebecca even um, just highlighted that word sponsorship, that's really what I'm looking for. Like you do need some people on your team who are willing to be that sponsor for you, who are willing to write that letter of recommendation for you, who are willing to, again, like I said, if they are in a position of power, be able to say, you know what, I'm pulling you along with me. You're someone that I want to come with me, and that I want to say, okay, this person needs to be in this room as well. So those are the types of things. I'm just basically just bringing that to the forefront, that is something that I think people should be looking for in mentoring as well.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you. Let's see. We are out of time, basically. I don't know if our panelists have another minute or so. We have a couple more questions, and I'll share them with you. so that we can discuss them later. But as we're wrapping up, what is maybe one key point that you would like to leave our participants with about mentoring? What's one piece of advice or one action that you would recommend folks take as they're developing successful relationships with their mentees?
How about be real with your students? Be who you
Don't be,
are.
don't be afraid to try.
Go ahead, Bill.
I was gonna say, I think I've stumped you.
I think we've said it before, but the main element is getting across the authentic message, I care, and that opens all the doors. And it can absolutely be done as part of the teaching process. There's not a line, it's all blended. And caring is the starting point.
Maybe just the other thing I'd say is you can tell from all of our perspectives how valuable we have found our mentoring opportunity and experiences to be in our own careers. So, it's not something that, you just do because it's helpful to the mentee. It's actually a hugely rewarding part of an academic career.
Great point.
Well, I want to thank our panelists for their time this morning. Hope everyone, just for sharing your wisdom with us this morning, and we really thank you. And please feel free to stick around for our last little bit of reflection. So, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It's great to be with you.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and move into a little bit of reflection and planning. So if you have your handout ready, go ahead and open the handout. And you can feel free to turn your cameras back on if you'd like to have your camera on so that we can look at this. So on your handout on page 2, at the bottom half of the page says planning and reflection. It has a 2-column graph or chart. So take a minute. I'm going to give you probably 2 minutes to do this on your handout, and I'll share the handout in a minute. I'll put it on screen. Based on your conversations in the workshop today, what are your strengths as a mentor? And then what are some areas for improvement that you would like to work on based on what you've learned today? So just we're going to give you 2 minutes to fill out that little chart, and then we'll come back for the second half. And Carol just dropped the handout link in the chat if you haven't seen it yet. ahead and start wrapping up that thought. Okay, so what I would like to do now is if you look on the next page of your handout, you'll find a big star with some points on each of the stars. So this is called a starfish activity. This is something that you can use in your classes. I do it all the time, especially when I'm helping students figure out how to collaborate successfully. It's one of the little activities that I do with them. So thinking about the list and your reflections for the day and your work and what you've heard from our mentors and our workshop facilitators, thinking about how you plan to be a good mentor this semester, how you plan to continue to develop successful relationships with your mentees. So each of the pillars is kind of a behavior thing, even kind of a thought thing. So what are you going to keep doing that you're already doing? What would you like to start doing? What are you going to stop doing? And then what are you going to do more or less of in terms of your mentoring? So I'm going to send you into breakout rooms. Carol's going to send you into breakout rooms just to have kind of a conversation about different elements that you might like to try. And so you can bounce ideas off of some colleagues. So we'll go for probably 8 minutes and then we'll come back and we'll ramp up. So you can complete the STAR activity with some colleagues and see how you would like to think about your mentoring for this semester. So Carol, if you want to go ahead and send the breakouts. And we'll see you back shortly.
Like somebody ended up by themselves. Oh wait, no.
I think they're
It was
okay.
1 out of 3, but I see 3 people in there. Okay, good. Actually, it looks like every room has at least 3 people in it, so that's good. I see Ulisa, you're still here in the main room. Did you bounce out of a room?
Yeah, when it says they left.
Okay. Maybe they were just trying to leave. Okay.
Well, if we'd had that 4 hours, that panel could have gone on for at least another half an hour.
Yeah,
Really
that was
powerful.
such an awesome discussion.
Yeah, I didn't
And
want
great
to cut it short.
questions too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the chat has been active and it's been great. I think we can bring them back at 52 or 53.
Okay.
I'll give them a little bit of time. I turn my light back on. My light keeps turning itself off. But I didn't stop the recording, so we want to stop that.